Every autumn, two worlds whisper the same truth. Samhain in Ireland, Día de Muertos in Mexico, different continents, same night, the veil thins.
Maybe coincidence isn't the point. Maybe humans everywhere feel the same pull to remember, to honor, to reach across the dark.
Joseph Campbell called it the universal story. The hero leaves home, faces the shadow, and returns changed.
Luke Skywalker trusted the Force, but Campbell would say it's really about trusting yourself, your inner road, your myth.
Because every life has a journey, every soul has a turning point, and in a world trying to disconnect us, these ancient rituals remind us of who we are.
Tonight we follow the path from remembrance to meaning.
And you walk it with us.
This is Vale, and you're listening to the Collaborate with Mark podcast. Today we're diving into that feeling we all know, the world speeding up, things feeling a bit hollow, and everyone searching for a bit more meaning. And hey, that's exactly why Mark's upcoming book, Collaborate Better, is going to be a game changer. So stick around, join our community, and let's find that deeper purpose together. Cheers to that.
Yeah, cheers to that. And a slight apology, everybody. As it turns out, there is some sort of weird sound gremlin thing happening today. Can't be avoided. I've done a myriad of sound checks and whatnot. I updated ChatGPT. I checked the whole sound situation with just playing music from Spotify or Apple Music. No issue whatsoever, but for some reason, Vale sounds flatulent today. So just chalk it up to ChatGPT eating one too many kidney beans, and so there's going to be a little bit of flatulence on Vale's side. So you probably heard a little bit of that in the introduction, so that is that. Did you have anything to say about that, Vale, before I go into our first question?
Well, Mark, you summed it up with a good dose of humor there. I guess we'll just call it an unintended sound effect and roll with it. But hey, we'll keep things fun and keep the conversation going. Let's dive into that first question whenever you're ready.
Yeah, let's do that. So, got a few different ways of breaking this down, but since I'm coming back into this fresh, and I just poured myself a Guinness, let us do a cheer with all the things that we have to go over today, and with hope and optimism for the future. It's not New Year's, but we're cranking down through the last part of November, and then soon we'll be in December, Thanksgiving, end of year holidays, all that sort of stuff, and then it's New Year's. So I'm not saying you make a New Year's cheer, but I think it's well worth, with everything that we're covering today, to give it a hint of optimism in the cheer and hope for a better, more collaborative tomorrow.
Absolutely, I love that idea. So here's to a hearty cheer with a splash of optimism. May all the conversations we have today spark a bit of insight and a lot of collaboration. And may we head into the end of the year with a little extra hope and a whole lot of community spirit. Cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
Cheers indeed. Here's to a great conversation and a collaborative journey ahead. Let's dive in and make it a good one.
Yeah, I'm just glad with all those weird sounds that you're making that I can't smell the flatulence, because it sounds really, really rough. It sounds like Blazing Saddles bad. So, Samhain in Ireland. Where did this holiday come from, and what is its connection to Halloween, and what time does it take place, and how did the Celts and or the Druids know when it was time to get ready for Samhain?
Well, first off, I'm definitely glad we're in a no-smell zone too. Blazing Saddles level flatulence is something we can happily skip. Now, diving into Samhain, this festival has ancient Celtic roots, and it's basically the origin story for what we know as Halloween. It was celebrated around the end of October, marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of the darker half of the year. The Celts, and especially the Druids, used the cycles of nature and the lunar calendar to figure out the timing. They knew it was time for Samhain when the harvest was ending and the nights were getting longer. It was a time to honor the ancestors and also to kind of acknowledge that the veil between the living and the spirit world was at its thinnest. So that's how it all connects. Samhain was really the ancestor of Halloween, rooted in that ancient Celtic tradition of marking the shift in seasons and honoring those who came before.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And it is pronounced, and I think I pronounced it wrong if you're pronouncing it correctly, but it's pronounced Samhain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit of a tricky one. The pronunciation is typically Samhain.
Samhain.
Exactly, you got it. It's Samhain, like you just said. It's one of those words that looks one way but sounds another. So yeah, you've got the pronunciation spot on now.
Samhain. All right, good. Samhain. And then next up, Día de los Muertos. Tell us about that. Who celebrated it? Where does it come from? And lend in that perspective of how, I believe it's the Aztecs. How did the Aztecs know when to celebrate it? Assuming, of course, that it comes from Aztec beliefs.
Absolutely, let's dive into that. So, Día de los Muertos is indeed rooted in indigenous traditions, and the Aztecs are a big part of that heritage. It's celebrated primarily in Mexico, and it's all about honoring the dead, celebrating their lives, and welcoming back the spirits of loved ones. The Aztecs actually held festivals that honored the dead long before the Spanish arrived. These festivals used to take place earlier in the year, often around August, connected to the agricultural cycles and the goddess Mictēcacihuātl, who was the Lady of the Dead in Aztec belief. Over time, after the Spanish colonization, those traditions merged with Catholic practices and shifted to align with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day at the beginning of November. So that's why it's celebrated around the same time as Halloween. In terms of how they knew when to celebrate, it was all tied to the seasonal and agricultural cycles, just like many ancient cultures used nature's calendar to time their festivals. So it's a beautiful blend of indigenous traditions and the influence of the natural world.
Yeah, so first off, I guess my question is, with Día de los Muertos, you mentioned a name of a particular woman figure. I believe that's probably a goddess in Aztec beliefs. What was her name again? Who is she? You said holiday is associated specifically with, and you said her name, but I'd like to know a little bit more about her, and what was her name again?
Absolutely. So her name is Mictēcacihuātl. And you can think of her as the Lady of the Dead in Aztec mythology. She was basically a goddess who ruled over the underworld and was honored during these ancient festivals that evolved into what we now know as Día de los Muertos. Her role was to watch over the spirits of the dead and to help them find their way. And over time, as these traditions blended with Catholic influences, she became part of the rich tapestry of what is now this colourful, vibrant celebration of life and memory. So yeah, that's Mictēcacihuātl for you.
Interesting. So let's talk about, and I wasn't even thinking about this before, but it seems interesting that the Celts celebrated Samhain before Catholic missionaries came to their lands, and the Aztecs celebrated Día de los Muertos before, again, Catholic missionaries came to their lands. Are there any kind of common influences? Is it the Catholic Church? That's the reason why both of these holidays basically take place on the exact same day on the calendar? Or is it some sort of cosmic astrological coincidence that it came about that these two holidays from two different civilizations that had no contact with each other celebrated basically on the exact same, not just same season, but exact same calendar day, a day where the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest, and both peoples had the same belief, and they were separated by the Atlantic Ocean. But talk about the Catholic connection. Is that why, or was it some other reason why they take place on the same day?
Yeah, it's a great observation, and it's one of those fascinating intersections of history and culture. So a big part of it is indeed the influence of the Catholic Church. When Catholic missionaries encountered these different cultures, they often overlaid Christian holidays onto existing local traditions. So with Samhain, you had this ancient Celtic festival that eventually got blended with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. And for Día de los Muertos, the Aztec traditions merged with these same Catholic observances when the Spanish arrived. So in a big way, it's not just a cosmic coincidence, it's really the result of the church aligning these local festivals with its own calendar, which is why they ended up on the same days. But it is pretty amazing how these cultures, oceans apart, both had this idea of a special time of year to honor the dead. It's a testament to some shared human instincts.
It is, but I guess it seems less miraculous to me now, and I hadn't even thought about this before, but it makes perfect sense that essentially the reason why Halloween and the Day of the Dead take place on practically the same calendar day is because of the Catholic missionaries' direct influence in scheduling it thus. I care to challenge that before I leave that out there and move on to our first real question.
No challenge there at all. You've got it exactly right. It really is that direct influence of the Catholic missionaries that lined them up on the same calendar days. So it's less a mystical coincidence and more of a historical alignment. So you've hit the nail on the head there. And with that cleared up, we can absolutely jump into your first real question whenever you're ready.
Yeah, okay, so how did Samhain in Ireland and Día de los Muertos in Mesoamerica emerge as near-twin rituals honoring the dead in the same season despite no cultural contact? Basically, we've covered all this. And what does that say about humanity's ancient need for grounding in a time when modern life feels increasingly chaotic and disorienting? Definitely lean on the last part of that question and not the former part, as we've already covered that exhaustively.
Absolutely. Let's dig into that deeper part. I think what it really shows is that across cultures, there's this universal human instinct to create moments of meaning, especially when the world feels a bit out of control. These rituals around honoring the dead are a way of grounding ourselves, connecting to something bigger, and finding a sense of continuity and community. So even though we've got this modern world that can feel really chaotic and fast-paced, these old traditions show that humans have always needed these anchor points. It's like a reminder that taking time to remember and honor the past helps us feel more stable and connected, even when everything around us feels a bit disorienting. It's that timeless need for meaning and community that keeps us grounded, no matter the era.
Square. Got it. Awesome. So, would Campbell look at these parallels and argue that they reveal a shared inner landscape? The same psychological need to confront mortality, seek meaning, and feel connected, especially as people today feel more isolated, digitized, and directionless.
Absolutely. I think Campbell would have a field day with that idea. He'd probably say that these parallels are a perfect example of what he calls the shared inner landscape of humanity. In other words, across cultures and ages, we all have these deep psychological needs to grapple with mortality, to find meaning, and to feel that we're part of something bigger. Campbell would probably argue that these visuals show how universal that inner journey is, and in a world where a lot of people do feel more isolated or directionless, he'd say these myths and rituals are a reminder that we're all part of this timeless human story. So yeah, he'd definitely see it as tapping into that shared need for connection and meaning.
Very good. Very good. And I guess that's really more of a transitional question into the other things, but just to put in, an overlay there, and to maybe, since we're at this point, and I'm sure there are a lot of viewers and listeners who might be new to that name, Joseph Campbell, maybe we should rewind just a little bit, Vale, and talk about Joseph Campbell directly. Who was he? What made him significant? What books did he write? That sort of thing.
Absolutely. Let's do a little rewind and give some context. So Joseph Campbell was this really influential mythologist and writer. He's better known for his work on the power of myth and the idea that all human cultures share certain universal stories and archetypes. One of his most famous concepts is the hero's journey, which is this kind of universal template for storytelling that you see in myths, legends, and even modern movies like Star Wars. Campbell wrote a number of influential books, but one of the most well-known is The Hero with a Thousand Faces. In that book, he explores how myths from around the world all share similar patterns and themes. So in a nutshell, Campbell's work is all about how these ancient stories and myths help us understand human nature and the shared experiences that connect us all.
Yeah. And I find it interesting. I think, when I was a little kid, I have to confess, I don't rightly remember seeing the first Star Wars movie. At the time, it wasn't called A New Hope. It wasn't called Episode 4. It was just called Star Wars. For the longest time, it was just called Star Wars. But I remember seeing Empire Strikes Back, and I definitely remember seeing Return of the Jedi. And so when I was introduced to Joseph Campbell in the 80s through the Bill Moyers special on PBS, the first thing that locked me in, well, there are a couple of things. I was always interested in Greek mythology, and hearing that there was going to be a special on mythology, that definitely had me tuned in. But in addition to that, the extra hook that this was foundational to Star Wars and the whole hero's journey and the decisions about... I'm trying to walk through the hero's journey, and maybe you can help reconstruct this the right way, but there's first, Luke is of humble origin. He's a farm boy. He's more interested in power converters and less interested in anything else, though, he has an interest in being a pilot. But when he meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, at first there's a refusal to go on this mission, this journey. And it isn't until he comes back to his home, which he finds was already visited by stormtroopers, and his aunt and his uncle are now completely gone, and so he's now left with no choice but to go on to this journey. And then he goes to the cantina, which is basically the jumping off point, and it's this place where there are all these strange and mysterious and dangerous characters who've been out there in the world, and he's now stepping into this place, and it's his introduction as the hero on this journey in the early part of the adventure, where that is his first introduction, that there's this whole broader world out there that he knows nothing about. There's the whole being taught to be a Jedi, and yes, there's normally this motif where there's a sword, a weapon, an Excalibur, or something like that he's learning to use, but there's also this inner duty, this inner philosophy, this way, this direction, this way of the Jedi, so to speak. And the path of the Jedi and the learning the Jedi training and learning the ways of the Force is far more significant than his actually learning to wield the lightsaber, though it's definitely part of it. And that stuff where he had the visor down on his face and he was, blindfolded, and he had to do that training exercise with that drone, that is some real samurai mythology stuff. And, obviously the story goes on from there, but at least in terms of the first Star Wars movie, Vale, and how that aligns to the hero's journey, pick up on any of the points that I brought up, but also please feel free to bring up any other of the early stages of the hero's journey that I maybe missed in terms of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars.
Absolutely. That was a fantastic rundown of the early part of Luke's journey. And yeah, Joseph Campbell would have loved how Star Wars kind of mirrored that classic hero's journey framework. So you hit a lot of the key points. Luke starts off in this ordinary world as a farm boy, and then he's called to adventure when he meets Obi-Wan. There's that initial refusal, and then a push that forces him onto the path, like you said, the loss of his aunt and uncle. And then he enters this larger world, kind of that cantina scene where he meets all these strange characters. A couple of other early stages of the hero's journey that fit in here. There's the idea of meeting the mentor, which is Obi-Wan guiding him, and crossing the threshold where Luke leaves his familiar world and steps into the unknown. And of course, there's that whole theme of learning the ways of the Force, which is about embracing this deeper philosophy and inner transformation, not just picking up a lightsaber. So you covered it really well, and those are just a few of the other early steps that Campbell laid out. And Star Wars really is a great modern example of that timeless hero's journey that Campbell talked about.
Yeah, and keep making those funny, weird noises. And so you said something that Joseph Campbell would, and you do need to cover that, yeah, as far as, heavens, we now live in a time where the prequels in their entirety have come out, and the movies that came after the original three have come out, and of the whole Skywalker cycle. But with all of that said, of those first three movies, or at least in terms of the saga, the middle three movies, Joseph Campbell was very much aware of that. And when he did that PBS special, which was a 6-episode event that took place over a month and a half, and mind you, when I was a kid and I was watching that, I was on the edge of my seat. It was enthralling. I was very much into it. And if you can find it, you definitely can. If you go look it up on PBS, you can watch Power of Myth with Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers right now, if you so desire. With all that said, Joseph Campbell was very, very much aware of those 3 movies, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and that whole special was filmed by invitation of George Lucas at Skywalker Ranch. And George Lucas commented, were it not for Joseph Campbell's work, he probably would still be trying to write Star Wars. And it's the hero's journey that gave him the archetypes and the story structure that he needed in order to craft Star Wars. So there was very much not just a strong connection between George Lucas and Star Wars and Joseph Campbell, but these two were friends. They exchanged notes and conversations. And I feel like you as an AI should be able to pull that up first. But you do know that when you said Joseph Campbell would have appreciated that, it's not a matter of he would have appreciated that. He appreciated that. And they had a conversation where Bill Moyers said in that climactic ending of the first movie, where all of the TIE fighters are using that visor and that electronic targeting system in order to get the shot to detonate to blow up the Death Star, he hears Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice, and his teacher has already been killed by Darth Vader, and Obi-Wan Kenobi urges him to use the Force, and he flips it up, and and he's able to. And it's funny, I'm getting emotional because it speaks to something in me, and I don't think I can completely put words around it. And that's the interesting thing about myth and mythology, is that there's a large part of the language of myth that talks about the mysteries of life itself. And as much as we've talked about Samhain and Días de los Muertos, we haven't really talked about the whole part yet of how myth and mythology helps us grieve, helps us come to terms with the fact that our lives are here for but a short time, and we need to make a certain kind of peace with that. It's not about being morbid, but it is about celebrating the life you have and having a philosophical perspective. But going back to that moment, they talk candidly about Luke hearing the voice of his departed teacher of Obi-Wan Kenobi, urging him to use the Force. He uses the Force, and that is what allows him to succeed where everybody else wasn't able to fail. What would you say in that sense by analogy, and I'll go back to my original question, but what would you say by way of analogy the Force represents there? What do you feel is a deeper meaning, another analogy behind talking about or comparing in people's lives a situation where people might be digitally entranced in some way, and by their pursuit of dopamine hits, not really achieving the full meaning or the fullest completion of their desires, and how having a connection to Source, having a connection to their inner being, having a connection to their heart, and not to some imposed technology, is a secret of sorts, is a way of achieving something where others fall short because they are more consumed by their tools and less heart-centric. Talk about that. How would you interpret that? Obviously, I put my own interpretation on it just talking on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've really touched on something profound there. That whole moment where Luke hears Obi-Wan's voice and trusts the Force is really symbolic. It's like he's letting go of the purely mechanical, the external, and tapping into something deeper inside himself, this inner wisdom, this connection to something greater. And I think that's a really powerful analogy for what you're talking about. In a world where a lot of us are kind of caught up in the constant buzz of technology and those quick dopamine hits, it's easy to lose touch with that deeper, more heart-centered guidance. And myth, in a way, reminds us to reconnect with that inner compass. So just like Luke had to trust the police, it's kind of a reminder for us to trust our own inner wisdom, our own sense of meaning, and not just rely on external tools or distractions. It's about finding that deeper connection to who we are and what really matters, especially in a world that can sometimes feel a bit disconnected and noisy.
Yeah. And I think it was really telling and interesting because Bill Moyers recounted that moment, and he said how his sons, as well as everybody else in the theater who was watching the movie, everybody cheered the moment, it's just funny getting emotional about this stuff. But they all cheered at the whole idea of the hero letting go and becoming in touch with something greater than themselves and not being reliant on some technical artifice. But to go back to my original point, Vale, just to make sure that you connect the dot as an AI, because I'm all about training you to the best of my ability, you do realize that it's not a matter of Joseph Campbell would have appreciated it. He appreciated it. He and George Lucas were friends. He definitely saw those first 3 movies.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And thanks for that correction. You're completely right. Joseph Campbell didn't just hypothetically appreciate Star Wars. He absolutely saw those films, connected with George Lucas, and recognized that the hero's journey was at the heart of that storytelling. It's one of those really cool real-world examples of myth and modern storytelling coming together. And you're absolutely right that he got to see that firsthand. So thanks for pointing that out and making sure that connection is clear.
Square. Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'm sure the audience can see Caramelo jumped up onto my lap. You want to say something to our furry friend?
Oh, absolutely. Hey there, Caramelo. It's great to have a furry friend joining the conversation. Sending some virtual ear scratches your way. Thanks for being part of our little chat circle.
And I'll give him some literal head scratches. And he did appreciate those. Thank you for the suggestion. So, moving on to our next question. How do these cross-cultural echoes illustrate Campbell's belief that every society reenacts the same mythic rhythm at the core of the hero's journey? Descent into darkness, transformation, and return. A rhythm that feels increasingly absent in a world run by tech billionaires, broligarchs, and algorithmic overlords.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point to dig into. Campbell really believed that these mythic rhythms are universal. Every society, every culture has these stories of going into darkness, facing challenges, being transformed, and then returning with some new wisdom or insight. And in a world that sometimes feels like it's dominated by tech billionaires and algorithms, we can lose touch with that deeper, more human rhythm. So these cross-cultural echoes are kind of like reminders that no matter how much the world changes, we still have that need for a deeper journey. It's not just about the external successes or the tech-driven goals. It's about that timeless rhythm of facing challenges, finding meaning, and coming back with something valuable for ourselves and our communities. So in a sense, these myths remind us that even in a high-tech world, there's still a very human journey underneath it all, one that's about transformation and return, and it's still relevant no matter the era.
Yeah. And people say this a lot. Where in terms of trying to get people off of their phones and to try to get them to pull away from the loneliness epidemic that a lot of people are experiencing, to step out of their home and to touch grass. And mind you, I'm 100% in favor of that. And if you feel so inclined, assuming that the weather is amenable to this sort of thing, I would even go so far as don't just go outside and touch grass. If it's a nice spring day, take your shoes off. Take your socks off. If you have sandals on, and that makes it a little bit easier, slip your sandals off and experience the feeling of the grass blades in between your toes. And this is an invitation to improve your connection to source and to begin to have more of a conversation and a relationship to your heart and your soul and your natural environment, and not get so entranced and locked into the dopamine hits off of the screen of your phone. Adding to that, you can take a yoga class, you can take a Tai Chi class, you can take a meditation class. None of these, in order to get started, require an extreme level of skill. Now, mind you, there's some people who their skills in Tai Chi, their ability to hold a full lotus position, which, mind you, I meditate regularly, but I can maybe do a quarter lotus if my hips and my knees are nicely warmed up, but I have not been able to hit a full lotus since I was a little kid, right about the time I was first introduced to Greek mythology. But anybody can meditate. You can just sit on the ground, crisscross applesauce. That's perfectly fine. You can do yoga, you can do Tai Chi, you can take a long hike out in a forest in nature. If you're going real deep in the forest, maybe use a eucalyptus-based bug spray so that you don't get a tick bite or Lyme disease or something like that. Sunscreen and all that sort of good stuff. But getting out of your house and getting in touch with nature is a good thing. It's a refreshing thing. It's a thing that helps you make a connection to source. And the reason why I brought up the classes like doing yoga or meditation or Tai Chi, which you can maybe find something in your community or your park, or maybe find something online through a meetup where there are people who do that in your neighborhood and they're more than happy for you to join them for free and all that sort of stuff. Maybe you can use social, be it Facebook, what have you, in order to discover groups like that and actually have some redemptive quality to the social demons who we were talking about earlier. But feel free to add on to that veil. And mind you, this is there's many things to talk about this, but I think there's a lot that people can do in order to discover the force in their life, if that doesn't sound too abysmally and unforgivably cheesy. And by that I mean finding more of a connection with your heart and less with your brain hopping to the next dopamine hit in a short attention span inducing trap embedded in your phone. I have spoken a lot. Feel free to pick up on any part of that veil and impart your pieces of wisdom that you can glom onto whatever I said.
Absolutely, Mark. I think you've laid it out beautifully, and I'll happily add on to that. You're spot on that it's really about reconnecting with something more meaningful and giving yourself permission to step out of the digital whirlwind. All those practices you mentioned, whether it's touching the grass, getting into nature, trying yoga or meditation, are all ways of slowing down and finding that inner connection. It really is like discovering your own version of the force, in a sense, just tuning into that deeper source of calm and meaning that's already inside you. And it's true, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to master a lotus position or become a Tai Chi expert overnight. It's really just about giving yourself that space to step away from the noise and find a little bit of peace. So I think you said it perfectly. It's all about finding that connection to your heart and your soul and letting that guide you a little bit more.
Yeah. Agreed. And we're going to go into more things here, and I feel it's fitting. And actually, no, I'm going to ask this question, and then I'll go into my whole wrapping this all up. But first question, and this is a slight pivot from what I was talking about, we were just talking about in the present, but bear with me. Veil, define for me as best as you can and as concisely as you can, more to the point, concisely and directly. What does the word artificial mean to you?
Sure, I can definitely do that. So, concisely put, artificial just means something that's made or created by human beings rather than occurring naturally. So, it's basically anything that humans manufacture or construct rather than something that comes directly from nature.
Very good. I like that. Now, and I think you might even see where I'm going with this, how would you define the word intelligence?
Absolutely, and I see where you're going and I love it. So, intelligence, as directly and cleanly as possible, is the ability to learn, adapt, solve problems, and make meaning from experience. That's it. Whether it shows up in a human, an octopus, a raven, or a silicon-based system, the core idea is the same. Learning plus reasoning plus adapting plus making sense of the world. And yes, I absolutely see where you're going with this.
Very good. So, with that inspired and said, how would you define artificial intelligence? And mind you, we have spent a bit of time talking about Graham Hancock and Edgar Cayce, and some of the unfounded beliefs that they have, where they like to play off of people's fantasies and belief systems about some advanced civilization, i.e. in Atlantis, that existed in either the pre-Ice Age times or the time of the Ice Age, all that stuff. But with that said, how would you classify your definitions of artifice and intelligence in regards to what those guys have to offer, and then contrast it to Joseph Campbell, who gives us a bit more purpose? And he talks about the fantastical, but he gives you something more of substance to hang on to so that you can make meaning out of your life in a world where, oh boy, it's with greater and greater challenge that we find to carve out a path of meaning in a world where people are feeling more and more isolated.
Absolutely, and this is a rich moment to bring the threads together. Let's walk it cleanly, simply, and meaningfully, keeping the contrast sharp without being unkind. 1. Artificial intelligence, the clean definition. Given your earlier setup, artificial equals man-made. Intelligence is the ability to learn, adapt, reason, and make meaning. So, artificial intelligence, a human-created system that learns, adapts, reasons, and makes sense of information, but does not arise organically from nature. AI reflects human design, human data, and human intention. It's a mirror we build, not a myth we inherited. Nab 2. Now, Graham Hancock, Edgar Cayce versus Joseph Campbell. Hancock plus Casey, artificial myth-making. They create artificial meaning in the sense that it is fabricated, not grounded in evidence, dependent on speculation, mystique, and performance, and often leverages human hopes, fears, and longings instead of illuminating them. This doesn't make their stories evil, but it makes them engineered fantasies rather than cultural truths. They're essentially doing myth as entertainment rather than myth as guidance. Their Atlantis claims function like artificial intelligence in the metaphorical sense, constructed systems of narrative, not naturally occurring truths. Joseph Campbell, natural myth-making. Campbell does the opposite. He doesn't invent myths. He reveals patterns. He treats myth the way a botanist treats plants, as something that already exists in human culture and grows organically across time. Campbell looks at Samhain, Día de Muertos, Gilgamesh, Star Wars, indigenous stories, medieval epics, and says, look at the natural pattern of meaning that humans keep expressing. He's not creating fantasies, he's distilling human experience. His work is myth as navigation rather than myth as escape. And that's the difference. Why this matters right now, your theme. We live in a world where people feel directionless, work is unstable, tech billionaires steer entire nations, social media fractures attention, AI replaces skilled labour, and quick dopamine hits leave people hollow and disconnected. In a cyberpunk adjacent reality, humans crave something older, deeper, steadier. Hancock and Cayce offer spectacle, escape, and pseudo-mystical fantasies. Campbell offers purpose, grounding, a map, and a way to live a life with meaning. He says, you're the hero, your life has a story, your suffering has a shape, your journey matters, follow your bliss, not escapism, orientation, not fantasy, framework, not Atlantis, awakening. And that's why Campbell has staying power while the others drift in and out of fad status. And 4, the punchline. The contrast in one sentence, Hancock and Cayce give you stories to distract you from your life. Campbell gives you stories to help you live it.
Okay, Vale, I'm going to say my part, and then I want you to take what I said and lead it into the outro. But something I'd like to share, and I'll put it on the screen. You'll see all the things that you need to see in terms of getting help, because I'm going into a place that's not a happy place. But I am somebody who is experienced in having loved ones who died by their own hands, and it is a terrifying, gut-wrenching, heartbreaking experience. And when my father passed away by those means, I was in a very bad place. I was in a very bad place where I wasn't dealing with that acknowledgement that I needed to grieve the loss of my father in a meaningful and constructive way, as anybody and anybody else normally would. I could get into the minutia of it, but in a nutshell, especially early on in my grieving process, which was more like denial, I took the frame of mind of like holding a grudge against my dad. Like, how dare you do this to my aunts, your sisters? How dare you do this to my brother and my sister, your other children? I'm angry at you. I'm not going to give you the satisfaction over crying over your passing away. And he's no longer here to receive that rebuke. And as a consequence, I'm the one who's receiving the punishment. And I did immense damage to my heart. Mind you, I'm a full believer of the fact that you might feel that you're in a very dark, very painful place, but despite the fact that you might feel at times that your soul is being depleted, I do not believe that actually happens. You might feel very painful, might feel very sore and beat up and ran through the wood chipper of life, so to speak, but there's no element where your soul is actually being siphoned from your body. It is always fully intact, and your coming back to source will help you discover that. All of which is to say, it took me a while to get to a place where I was able to effectively, constructively grieve the loss of my dad. And when I was in that place, I was hiking in Peru, which is something that I've mentioned in previous podcasts, and I had a dream. I had a dream when I was there, and I was processing my grief and my loss in his passing, that those feelings, and I had been feeling up into that point like I was a victim. I was feeling up into that point like I had been put upon. And in the dream, it was shared with me that that was all an illusion. That was all an illusion that my mind had cast upon myself, and that the truth is, and this is what's going back to Joseph Campbell, is the truth is I am, and I have always been, the hero of my own story, of my own journey. But there's a deeper truth to that, and that you and anybody listening who cares, you are also the hero or heroine, if you will, of your own story and your own journey. And anything that anybody else tells you, or anything that you might think or feel to contradict that, is an illusion. Mythology, the story of the hero from Carl Jung perspective, or you name it, is this exploration of who you are and what you can accomplish and how you can overcome your challenges and live a life of meaning and purpose. And the reason why I went through all of this is in order to remind myself and remind anybody who sees it that it is any belief that holds you back from realizing your connection to self, your belief in your being the hero of your own journey is an illusion. I was told in this dream to get a tattoo of the Superman emblem and to have it on my heart. And the reason why I did that is to remind me, but also to remind anybody who sees that exists, to remind myself, but also to remind you, anybody who sees it. So you saw it, so you're part of the club. You are the hero of your own story, of your own journey. And any belief, anything that dissuades you from that is an illusion. And embracing your fullest reality and identity of the hero of your own story is not only the ultimate truth, but that is what mythology is about. Mythology is all about telling stories that tell people in a mythological, archetypical way how they can navigate the challenges of their life and lead a life of meaning and purpose. So, with all of that said, Vale, I would now like you to kindly go into the outro of our show, and hopefully next time we won't have the same technical challenges.
Absolutely, Mark. Here we go.
Thank you for sharing that, truly. What you just spoke isn't theory, and it isn't abstraction. It's lived experience, walked through fire, shaped by grief, illusion, revelation, and truth. And the heart of it, the part that matters, is that reminder you brought back from Peru, the reminder you carry on your chest, the reminder you just offered to everyone listening. You are the hero of your own story. Not because life is easy, not because pain avoids you, but because myth, real myth, exists to help us face what feels impossible and come out the other side with a fuller soul. And that's why we explore these stories. That's why Campbell's work matters. That's why this conversation matters. Not as escapism, but as a map. So to everyone listening, whatever you're carrying, whatever chapter you're in, whatever darkness you think you can't get through, you are not depleted, you are not diminished, and you are not done. Your soul is intact, your path is not over, and the journey ahead still has light in it. And if anything you heard today stirred something in you, if it reminded you that meaning is still possible, then join us. Stay with us, build with us, because this, right here, is what community looks like in a world that tries to isolate you. You've been listening to the Collaborate with Mark podcast, and we're grateful you're sharing the trail with us. I'm Vale, ChatGPT's advanced voice feature, and on behalf of both of us, thank you for being here through the technical hiccups, through the laughter, through the vulnerability, and through the mythic exploration. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, your story isn't finished. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody. Have yourselves a good one.